I've never been more anxious behind the wheel of my Jeep than that day I slid off the trail in Mendocino National Forest. With my daughter in the back seat and barely enough fuel to get home. I damaged the Jeep. I had to double back. And by the time we were headed back, the fuel gauge wasn't comforting. It was a countdown clock. I've never felt that kind of pressure behind the wheel. And here's what changed everything for me. The Jeep did not quit, but I almost did. I came upon some slick, deep snow, and instead of stopping, I decided to keep going. And on a hairpin turn heading up the hill, the Jeep slid off the trail and into a downed tree. I heard a metal crunch. I knew I'd done damage. And we were deep enough that turning around wasn't simple. I really had to go forward in order to find a place to reassess the situation. And inevitably, it meant doubling back and burning fuel that I didn't plan on burning. By the time we headed out, I was watching that gauge tick down lower and lower to the point where it wasn't even registering. And it was terrifying being that many miles off the grid with your kid who honestly expects you to keep him safe. But the Jeep kept going. I pushed it harder and faster than I ever had before, and it kept answering the call. It got us back to Pavement into a nearby gas station with less than a gallon left to spare. And that's when it really hit me. The Jeep, it's not the limiting factor. I was. Hi, I'm Ben and this is Path to Rome. Here, I replace guesswork with understanding so that you can build your Jeep with real confidence and use it the way it was meant to be. I personally have taken my Jeep to some of the most harsh, remote territory there is out there. Most of the time, the Jeep came out unscathed, but sometimes we weren't so lucky. Most Jeep owners never understand what their Jeep is actually capable of. Not because the Jeep can't do it, but because they quit before they ever really reach that point. I didn't understand that at first either. I thought capability was something that you just installed. Turns out, it's something you uncover. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most of us mistake uncertainty for limitation. And this is exactly what we're going to talk about today. When you first start taking your Jeep off-road, everything feels risky. Every rock looks bigger than it actually is. Every noise sounds like it's going to be expensive. And every obstacle feels like a test. But most of that fear isn't actually about the Jeep. It's about understanding where that line actually is. Until you actually find out where that line is, you always are going to feel like you're close to it. And look, if your Jeep's just sitting in the driveway, you can't tell what it's capable of. You really only find this out when you're far enough out there that turning around is really not that convenient. And that right there, that's when things get real. And that's when people realize something pretty uncomfortable. They're not limited by the Jeep, they're limited by their own uncertainty. There's always a moment when everything just starts to change. You pull up to something that makes you stop. You look at it longer than you probably need to. And be honest, you've done that, haven't you? I sure have. Really, just kind of sat there and thought about what are the worst case scenarios here. But something inside you tells you, you know what, we're going to go for it. And the Jeep just does it. There was no drama, there was no chaos, you didn't break anything. And in that moment, something shifts. Because now you've seen it, you felt it, and you lived that moment. And it wasn't on YouTube, it was you who actually experienced it. And once you experience that, you can't undo it. And this is where most people stop. If I hadn't pushed to the absolute limit earlier that day, I would have left believing my Jeep couldn't have handled more. And that belief, that would have changed every decision I would have made after that. I would have overbuilt it, I would have overspent, and added parts that fixed problems that didn't even really exist. And that's not because the Jeep needed them, or didn't, it's because I didn't understand it yet. Now, I know, maybe my decision wasn't the smartest, but I knew that I had the tools to get myself unstuck if I really did get trapped. And ultimately I was able to and got myself turned around and headed home, and that line was just a lot closer than I wanted it to be. And look, capability does not reveal itself all at once. It really shows up in layers. You figure out what the Jeep can do, then you start learning how much input matters, your line choice, throttle control, your patience, what to do, what not to do. Look, two people can drive the exact same Jeep and get a totally different result. I've wheeled with people that they could take a stock Jeep and run it through anything. I have full faith in that. There's all different types of people out there. But those people have learned through incredible amounts of experience. Sliding off the trail taught me something really incredible. Capability is not about never messing up. It's about learning what your Jeep can actually tolerate and what you can. That day wasn't smooth. It wasn't clean. And honestly, it shook me to my core. But it truly showed me that the Jeep had a lot more margin than I thought it did. And that margin is something people never explore. Maybe the Jeep itself was never really the variable. And once that shift happens, you start to see your Jeep a little bit differently. Not as something fragile, but something capable, and you're really just starting to understand it. And look, I get it. Maybe my story is not incredibly inspiring to want to go push the limits, but the reality was I did make it home, and everything in one piece. A little damage on the Jeep, that can be fixed. But we tested things out, we pushed some limits, and we found out what we were made of. Once you get to this point, this is where upgrades actually start to make sense. Not before you go out, not before you've ever driven your Jeep, after you can see what your Jeep has actually done well and figure out what limitations you actually had. Now, if you're at the stage where you want to start making intentional upgrades and stop guessing, that's an amazing place to be. And this is why I trust Disciple Off-Road out of Hanford, California. They're not going to throw parts at problems that don't exist, but they're going to build your Jeep for real-world use. You may not be close enough to drive to their shop, but check out their website. I threw it in a link down below, and give Jeremy a call, and he'll be happy to help walk you through any questions you actually have. And again, the link's down below, but let's be honest about this. Upgrades are the wrong first move. Now here's where things really start to change. When you stop focusing on individual obstacles and start thinking about distance, when you're further from pavement than you've ever been before, further from cell service, further from immediate help, that is when capability starts to mean something completely different. It's not about flex or what you posted on your Instagram. It's about reliability, consistency, and trust. And this is where most people finally arrive at something. The Jeep wasn't fragile. They just didn't understand it yet. Let me ask you something. Have you ever turned around on a trail, not because you couldn't keep going, but because you weren't sure if you could keep going? And I'll tell you, I definitely have. So leave me a comment below because I'd love to hear your stories. But either way, you can probably guess that there's a difference between those two things. Not being able to and being unsure about it. And that difference right there, that's where confidence gets built. Most Jeeps, even factory, are far more capable than their owners ever discover. Not because the owners don't care, but because they never stay out there long enough to actually see it. Capability does not come from installing parts. You could take a Jeep that's brand new, slap 60s, 40s, coilovers on it, and take it out there and have no idea what you're doing. And the confidence that you need does not come from installing those parts. It comes from experience and exposure. That exposure is going to replace your uncertainty with understanding. If you want to understand your Jeep's real capability, here's what matters. First, years on the trail. You learn something every single time you go out. Second, progressive exposure. Go ahead and push it a little bit more every single time you hit the trail. And third, judgment. Not every obstacle is worth it. Not every trail needs to be finished, and not every risk is really even smart. And that balance, that's where the confidence really comes from. And once you realize that your Jeep is not the limiting factor, the next step isn't bigger tires, it isn't a lift. It's making sure that if something does go wrong, you're ready for it. Because confidence does not mean carelessness. I cannot stress that enough. Confidence means that you're prepared. If you're going to push your Jeep further, you need to understand recovery. Not just as gear or an accessory, but as an actual responsibility. A winch or recovery gear, especially if by yourself, could literally be the difference between life and death. You never know. But that video is going to be for another day. Now, if you're still early in the process, or you just want to understand what actually matters and what doesn't, I put together a free Jeep cost control playbook. It walks you through how to avoid wasting money, how to understand your Jeep properly, and how to build capability the right way. It's free, and it's in a link below if you're interested. Because the goal is not to build the most expensive Jeep. It's to build real understanding first. Now, if I can leave you with one thing from this video, it's to get out, drive your Jeep, understand it, learn what it can do, learn what it can't do. Don't just slap on thousands of dollars worth of parts and think that you're going to be fine. Because your Jeep isn't and will never be the limiting factor. Now, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and check out this one next. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you on the next one.